Our chairperson for this workshop has volunteered to be a chairperson for a workshop. It's the first time he does it, but he set the challenge and he said, yes, I can do it and I will go for it. He won last year's Humor Speech Contest for Olympians and went up to the area finals. To lead the next workshop, please welcome Neil Footman.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Good evening.
Would anyone like to hazard a guess as to what this is here? It is a cake, yes. Anything else to add?
Wedding.
Yes, it's a wedding cake, but it's not just any wedding cake, it's my wedding cake. From my wedding ceremony, which is almost exactly 2 years ago. Let me tell you, the entire day, by general consensus, was just fabulous. My wife's friends and family came over from Korea for the occasion. The ceremony, or a big one, the reception, was held in this palatial old library building. It's like something out of Hogwarts in Edinburgh University. And even the weather cooperated. In Edinburgh, in September, we got a whole day of sun. You could say we were blessed. And in many ways, I suppose we were. But there was one hideous flaw. Take another look at this cake. Looks great. And it did taste divine. But if you have a look at the top there, the cake is dedicated to my lovely wife, Janie, and some guy called Neil. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. On perhaps the single most important day of my life, and despite the repeated verbal and written instructions of me and my mother, the cake maker spelt my name wrong on my wedding day. Now, a bit of perspective perhaps. You might think, yes, it's a bit unfortunate, but it's a small thing in the grand scheme of things. The day went well, doesn't matter. Anyone can make a mistake. But that's exactly it, ladies and gentlemen. Anyone does make a mistake when it comes to my name. So instead of being just a simple mistake, this was more like the final insult to me. It was the culmination of a lifetime of Chinese water torture, of people spelling and pronouncing my name incorrectly. Let's be honest, it would be so much easier if I was just called Neil, huh? Everybody knows the name Neil, right? You've all heard that before. But throw the S on the end, as it is with my name, which is Niels, and the listener is thrown into a state of giddy confusion. Huh? Neil? Niels? So I wouldn't usually choose to begin a presentation, never mind a workshop, with a diatribe about me. I thought, given that in this room tonight there were quite a few people I've never met before, this would be the perfect opportunity to drive a stake through the heart of this undead misconception before it has a chance to fester any further. My name is Niels.
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 Or at a push, Niels. Not Neil, not Niall, not Niles, and certainly not Neil S. No, there aren't two of me. No, it doesn't mean I like to spend a lot of time on my knees. And no, wise guy, your name is not David's, or George's, or even Susan's. Right. Thank you. Now I've got that off my chest. Let's move into the meat of tonight's meeting. This speech was this was the beginning of the speech I gave as my icebreaker, which was the best part of 2 years ago now. And I went back, I revisited it actually, because, well, for several reasons. One reason is that although I was new to Toastmasters, I had no real idea of conventions or structure and so on. It still occurred to me that there were certain elements of this beginning that I later discovered are quite effective in preparing humorous speeches generally. So what I'm hoping to do tonight is point them out to you. There can perhaps be few more terrifying words in the English language than "be funny." But I hope, through this evening's proceedings, to show you some techniques which will be by no means guaranteed laughs. So much depends on the mood, your audience, if you're feeling well and so on. But these are regularly used techniques for a reason. They will give you hopefully some good ideas, and they will hopefully be able to add some humorous elements to your speech. It's worth also saying, as we prepare for the humorous speech, that humorous speeches, there might be a perception with comedy of humorous speeches that they are somehow less rigorous than serious speeches. But if anything, the reverse is true. Humorous speeches are really hard to pull off, and they require a lot of discipline very often to get right. This is something that's recognized in the judging criteria of the contest. You will be expected to have a beginning, a body, and an end. And you will be expected to do well, to be conveying some kind of message as well. What I'm going to do here this evening is give you plenty of time to practice as well. I'm going to talk as little as possible. I'll be going through 4 sections with, I hope, some practical suggestions, give you a chance to discuss in groups, and then we'll reconvene. So that's how the next section is going to work. Moving on. What is the first thing we need to do when preparing a speech of any kind? Any suggestions? What is the first thing you think about doing?
Get an idea.
Yes, of course. You need to find something to talk about. This can always be a challenge, and it can be an even bigger challenge if you're saying to yourself, what's something funny I'm going to speak about? So we need to find topics. Now, in order to do this, there are, again, as with anything, there are certain techniques you can follow that might help. Firstly, above all, it's always wise to know and appreciate your audience. Now, a very experienced member here said to me last week that it is perhaps more challenging than ever to come up with humorous elements because the audiences at Toastmasters now are just so international. And there are few things, surely, that translate as poorly as humour. That might be true up to a point, but I hope to show you that there remain lots of universal themes that everyone finds funny, particularly when we're gathered in a group like this. We have more commonalities than you might realize. Yes. Here's an example of someone who didn't know his audience. What he's doing there, I'm sure if it was done to a classroom full of 8-year-olds, it would be hilarious. But given the context, it's just not right. So, the challenge is to know your audience. As a general rule, to start, let's say this. Avoid topics that are outright offensive or too esoteric. If you go and see a stand-up comic in a comedy club, you kind of know what you're going for. You know it's going to be a bit edgy. With some comedians, it's going to be downright offensive. If you're talking to a room full of Toastmasters, this may be an ill-advised strategy, if you want to win a contest, that is. It pays not to be too esoteric either, by which I mean, if you're going to the Christmas IT party, that little anecdote you have about programming CSS may go down a storm. Tell it here, and it may leave people bemused. So try to keep both these rules in mind. So let's talk about these universal themes. What are they? What are these things that everyone in this audience could relate to on some level? There are actually all sorts, but here's some examples. Dating. Who among us has never dated? No one. All of us, in some context, at some point in your lives, have dated, and the chances are the first ones didn't go especially well, to say nothing of the last ones. There is an endless amount of humorous material here. In fact, the guy who came third in last year's area contest gave this great funny speech mocking his own inability with women. Further, he mixed it in with his own Indian heritage, which added a little cultural spice. Because he was talking about his own cultural background and religion, it was really funny. You start mocking someone else's, it's a bit risky, but his was great. So this is an obvious topic, an obvious theme. Work. We all work, or we all have worked, or we all will work. We all work in London, I guess. We all encounter the same weirdness and annoying things and absurdities of working in companies small and big. Another rich vein for you to draw on. Family issues. Anyone not had family issues in the past week, say? Whether it's utter exasperation with your hidebound parents, or it's these weird little nieces, nephews, kids, and these funny games they play, or your wife, or your husband. Yes, we could all talk about this at great length. Toastmasters related things. We are all Toastmasters, and I'll refer again to last year's area contest with a chap who won. I don't know who was there. So you remember this guy who won? It was really another level. It was an entire speech where he mixed up Toastmasters concepts with Buddhist concepts, and he called it Tantric Toastmasters. And he delivered this brilliant monologue with full of wordplay and sort of innuendo, and the audience loved it. But it worked because everyone understood the Toastmasters references, and everyone knew enough about Buddhism to get those jokes as well. I'm going to, if I can, see that the whole tech is working. I'm going to give you a little example of someone taking advantage of precisely that.
In 1697, the English playwright William Congreve wrote those immortal words, "Hell hath no fury like a woman's scorn." Today, not much has changed. A year ago, I was having a beer with two friends. We were all depressed. My first friend spoke. "Last night, my wife and I had a big fight. When it was over, she locked me out of the bed." My second friend said, "Last night, my wife and I had a big fight. When it was over, she locked me out of the house." I looked at my friends. "Last night, my wife and I had a big fight. When it was over, she came crawling to me on her hands and knees." My friends were astounded. "What did she say?" She said, "You can't hide under that bed all night, you coward!" Our logic, shot down. Our reasoning, ground to dust. Our arguments, melt like butter on toast. We have no defense we found no way out. That night, after the beer with my friends, I lay in bed thinking about our predicament. Where did we go wrong? And then it occurred to me, maybe men are the problem, not women. Maybe women just don't know how to argue properly. Maybe all they need is a little direction, but how to give it to them. And then I had a mad idea. At Toastmasters, we evaluate each other all the time. Next time my wife got angry, I'd evaluate her.
This is gonna work out
I
well.
was able to put my theory to the test. I'd gone out, lost track of the time, didn't call, and came home very late. When I opened the door, she was waiting. Have you lost your mind? And she proceeded to tear into me for 10 minutes. I watched, I listened, I took notes. When she was finished, she said, well, what do you have to say for yourself? I took a deep breath. Began. Honey, that was a wonderful performance. And lots of emotion. I really liked it. I'm going to tell you a few things that I particularly liked. And then I'm going to give you some suggestions on how you can improve.
Alright, I think you get the idea. Yeah, so you saw that he combined two things there I was talking about. He combined Toastmasters related things in an inventive way and family problems, in this case with his wife, put them together and the entire audience got it and loved it. So we've got general themes. How about specifics? What specifically could we talk about within those themes? Or what approach could we take within those themes? At moments like this, I like to ask what this guy would say. Yes, Mr. Simpson there. Someone we all recognize, of course. But it's not just that it's Homer Simpson, it's his pose. He's railing against the sheer unfairness of it all, whatever it is. Every episode, basically, we'll see him getting a real lather about some probably fairly trivial issue that he blows out of all proportions, usually through either his own stupidity or his own incompetence. So he just rails against the world and against the sheer unfairness of it all. And this kind of thing, these kind of rants or complaints against something in your life, something perhaps quite trivial, this can be a great source of material for humorous speeches. It can be so. I think the reason that rants can be so effective is all of us on some level gets annoyed by something quite small. And you probably don't like to really admit that it gets to you, or you wouldn't like to talk about it with other people. So when you see someone else up on stage going berserk about public transport or something really small, you say, oh, right, yeah, there's other people like that too, and it's relaxing and it's something you can laugh along to. So you might want to look at two ways when you're thinking about doing a rant. You could do something that's annoying, and like I said, maybe the smaller and pettier the better. Business jargon, as people will know, is a particular hatred of mine. It drives me nuts. These stupid phrases about leveraging synergies and blue sky thinking and all that, it just does my head in. And that was actually the topic of my speech last year, and I went off on a kind of rant on it for whatever it was, 6 minutes, and it seemed to do okay. People that lean on the pole in the tube. You know what I'm talking about, right? Packed tube, sweaty, hot, and yet this guy is taking a whole pole to play Angry Birds on his phone. How annoying is that? Hipster facial hair. Oh! What the hell is wrong with these twirly moustaches and bushy beards and they think they're all so individual like all the other individuals. Little things like this do get to you, and if you can elaborate on that and say why and make a speech, it can be a good source. Or maybe it's not exactly annoying, but it's just difficult. It's just something you have to do in daily life, but it's just a bit much. Networking. Yeah, if you're in the mood, if you're up for it, all right, it's good. And people insist you have to do it to progress your career, but clinking glasses and swapping hundreds of cards and smiling at stories and forgetting people's names, it's just kind of difficult, let's be honest. Raising twins, not something I've done myself, but one of our members here, Hassan, do you remember? Do people remember this? He gave a lovely little speech about his difficulties raising twins. One particularly funny bit was about how it was such a huge challenge just to keep them still long enough to put their shoes on. Little touches like that you find just a bit difficult. Public speaking. All of us, as Paul pointed out earlier, all of us get nervous, all of us face these little difficulties, all of us have these funny little tics that we do when we speak. It's all stuff that we can use to make the basis of funny speech. So to summarize what we've gone over so far. First of all, finding a theme, and try to make the theme universal, something that your audience feels like you're talking to them, not some speech you gave to someone else, but something that relates to them and their experiences. Having done that and avoided offense, look for something perhaps that is really annoying or really difficult. Some little challenge in your life that you could expand on. So, with that, I would like to take our first little break. This is going to require a bit of chair gymnastics. I'd like you to go, I think there were about 36 people in the room, so I'd like to go in groups of 6. Could you put your chairs in small circles? So you 5 and 6 here, please, and then you 6. 6 at the back, 6 more, 6 here, 1, 2, 3, 4, or maybe 4 here, and 4 here. That doesn't really Let's see, 3 minutes. So 3 minutes, 3-4 minutes. Can you please talk with your group and come up with an idea of your own that you think would work well in this context? The theme and something maybe that really pisses you off no end, or that you just find that a little bit difficult. And try to, discuss those ideas and try to come up with one that you like the sound of. So let's say 5 minutes, that's no longer 3 minutes. Off you go, please. One idea of what you discussed, just choose one. You said one If I mess up, I'll give you from at least one idea that you can work with the rest of the session. All right. Next, so we have our theme. We hopefully have our topic a bit more specifically. Next, we need the grand opening. For a humorous speech, as much as for any other speech, the opening is crucial. I'm sure there would be no one who disagrees with that. Or whatever it is, whether you're writing, presenting, whatever it is, the opening few lines do so much to grab or lose people's attention. If you get them, and I guess a lot of people here will know this, those who've given speeches, you'll know the difference. Sometimes it just, bang, you can really feel it, and you just feel like, right, I can tell jokes here and I know people are going to laugh. Or not. And other times it doesn't. And a lot of that tone can be set by what you say in your initial few lines. So, again, there are no guarantees, but there are certain methods and techniques that are regularly used by genuinely funny people, and they're used for a reason, because they do work frequently. First up, the anecdote. This is like a staple of all speeches. Told well, they can be fantastic. They can grab your audience immediately humanize the problem or whatever it is, make it much more personal than talking from a generality to begin with. I would say the secret to an especially effective anecdote isn't just one that grabs people's attention, although that is great. One that's funny and grabs people's attention is brilliant. If it also contains or demonstrates the broader point of your speech or your story, it's perfect. Because it'll stick with people, and that's the point we'll remember when they're thinking about the message of your speech, which is, if you're entering the context, also very important. Anecdotes, well, we saw from that guy, John Zimmer, earlier, talking about one guy who had a huge fight with his wife and she locked him in a room. The second one had a huge fight with his wife and she locked him in a house. And the third, with him, had a huge fight with his wife and she came up on her hands and knees, and so on and so on. And it was really, really funnily done. And not to blow my own trumpet, that's what I also tried to do at the beginning, using the example of this wedding cake, which in itself is pretty trivial, to demonstrate this broader thing that just drives me up the wall, in that everybody gets my name wrong. And it was, I hope, a memorable way to convey that point. A quote. Quotes are always good. John Zimmer used one again. He said in 1587 or whatever it was, Milton wrote, "Hell hath no woman, hell hath no fury like a woman's scorn." And everyone recognises it. It's sort of sets that they've sort of got some kind of idea of what's going on here. It's going to be about relationship discord or something like that. So if it's a well-chosen quote that people recognise, it can also be a quite effective opener. Suspense. In the speech I gave at last year's humorous speech contest, I began thus. There are two words that annoy me like almost no others. Two words that purport to bring us closer together, but actually show so much of what is wrong with how we interact today. Blah, 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 blah. The point was, the first time I gave that speech, even after the first line I gave it, it was one of those pleasant evenings when I really felt like I got people's attention. And there was a bit of suspense, and people going, what are those two words? It's also another effect, they were reach out, by the way, from interested. But it can be an effective way of grabbing attention early on. Begin with the end. Also for members of this club, there's a chap who comes here frequently, or used to, I think he's moved, he's called Mark. And on one occasion he gave this speech that, for the purposes of context, Mark is black. And his speech began, so there I was, tearing through a rough Parisian estate with National Front activists hot on my heels. What? Everyone's like, what the hell are you talking about? What's going on here? Because Mark's a very smiley, gentle fellow. And then this bombshell hits, like, what the hell are you talking about? And that was actually the climax of his story. The rest of the story was spent explaining how he got to that point. And it was a brilliant structure. It worked really well. And I think, again, most of the people who heard it would remember that intro very clearly. Yes, so, we have our opening, I hope. Or we have some ideas for an opening. Next. The body. It can be easy. Well, let's not come easy. It's a good body. Not mine, I should say. Well, he probably needs to be told that. I'm sure you will have seen speeches that came out of the blocks, hurtling out of the blocks. They were really funny. Wow, that's great. It generates a lot of laughs. And at some point, for whatever reason, they just lose a bit of momentum. As I mentioned earlier, the judges are looking for quite a structured speech, as they would with any other kind. They're looking for a beginning, a body, and a conclusion, and all this with a message. So, there are also some techniques that can typically be used in a humorous speech, and some of these with others as well, that can help maintain that, help keep a structure together, and help keep you moving in the right direction. Anyone know him? Dilbert?
Yeah.
Dilbert, yes. Dilbert is a good example of, well, a couple of things. One is, Dilbert's been around for about 30 years, and all they ever do is make jokes about work for 30 years. Not all of them are as funny as all the others, but all of them, the good ones, strike a chord with people because they kind of recognize that situation themselves. But they're also quite often a good example of extremes, going to extremes, taking it to an absurd extreme. So you're starting with a fairly normal situation or problem, something that everyone would kind of recognize at some level, and then following it through to just a bizarre conclusion, a bizarre logical conclusion. One example I'll quote from Dilbert is, the boss calls them all in the office, and he says, okay, we are overstaffed. What we're going to do is we're going to list everyone in the company from best to worst and chop the bottom 10%. So Wally, the guy who's usually with the coffee and the glasses, he says, so once we've got rid of that bottom 10%, that means we'll have another bottom 10%, is that right? Yes. So what do we do with them? Well, get rid of them, of course. Okay. And then, yes, we get rid of them. So what happens when we're down to the last 9 staff? Will we put them in order and then start removing their less useful body parts? And that's an example of it. It starts with a situation we don't recognize and follows it through to some bizarre conclusions. Power of 3 doesn't require much explanation. It's something you hear about all the time in speeches, but for a reason, it's really effective. Going back to John Zimmer's speech again, did you recognize his own use of the power of 3 there? He said, I talked to one guy and his wife, and he said, my wife was so mad we had a big fight, she was so mad, she's looking at the room. My wife was so mad, she's looking at the house. My wife came through on her hands and knees. And then he twisted at the end as well, that gag that makes fun of him, makes him look ridiculous. It's equally effective. If you're, rather than telling a story as you might do with extremes, if you're ranting about a point, if there's something that really annoys you or you find difficult, you can structure it that way too. To go back to my example of the speech I gave last year, the one about business jargon, I broke it into 3 points. And I started, the first one said, why do I hate it so much? Well, I hate it because it's ugly, it's effective, and it creates new words for which perfectly good ones already exist. And then off I went in my little tirade. Then brought it back to a second point, which was, and it also attempts to, and so on and so on. It gave a clear structure, and hopefully gave signposts and things for people to organize it mentally, in the point I was trying to make. Escalation. This can also be really funny for stories. Now, I was going to show a video, but unfortunately we had a technology meltdown, so another good topic for a humorous speech, I guess, technology meltdowns. But escalation would be a story where, again, you start with something fairly familiar and simple, a problem, a situation that everyone recognizes, and then through sheer bad luck, or more likely your own stupidity or insecurity, you make it worse and worse and worse. The example I was going to show was a chap, Neil Doherty, who won a district contest in the States, and he was talking about the first girl he ever hit on. A girl, he called her Bridget, because he saw her on a bridge. Really silly little thing, and it got a good laugh. And he said, so he fancied her from afar, he was a teenager. Again, something we all kind of recognize on some level. Instead of doing the normal thing, or the thing that might be effective, and just approaching her, he came up with this really elaborate plan to run up a hill and catch her at a certain point, and then head off and walk her down to school. And through the story, he has to run like crazy up the hill, and his books are bouncing off his back. By the time he gets there, he's dripping with sweat, and he looks ridiculous. Now, if he'd just done the obvious thing early on and approached her and spoken to her, he might have had a good outcome. As it was, it didn't go so well. And yeah, this kind of escalation structure, it might require a bit of poetic license on your part. It's unlikely most of us will have stories that follow this exactly, but you can kind of sculpt it a bit to make that. Yeah, so with that, I'd like you to take another few minutes. So you have, hopefully you have your topic for some kind of funny speech. Could you focus on adding a impactful but relevant introduction? And also, I realize you're not going to write a full speech in the time we have. If you can add any kind of body to it, to the speech you're talking about as well. If you could take 5 minutes to do that, please.
Have you ever walked
Oh, maybe not as long as it could be. I look forward to just found it when I was searching it. It's I'll give the link to Gaga. The guy who won last year, the tangent Toastmasters. As soon as he won, everyone knew he won. It was just like
Yeah, then someone left.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so we have a theme, we have a topic, I hope, we have an opening, we have at least the beginnings of a body view speech. There are also other things you can, little tricks and techniques you can add to spice it up here and there, and hopefully milk your audience for a few more laughs. So this will be the last bit we're looking at, these little skills. Has anyone seen this film? Napoleon Dynamite? Yeah. Good. So, self-deprecation. Self-deprecation is such a universally used trait, particularly it has to be said, I think, in British humor. But I think it strikes a chord wherever you go. Again, to go back to Neil Doherty's, which I'm afraid I couldn't show you. At one point he said, "I'm not sure why she liked me. Maybe it's because of my immaculately groomed eyebrows." And of course, he's actually got very bushy eyebrows. So by doing that, he just takes a little bit out of himself. Like some things about humor is perhaps hard to explain. Why it's funny, you could say perhaps someone who is willing to use self-deprecation appears secure and willing to laugh at themselves. And I think that's a very endearing trait. So, yeah, self-deprecation where you can, some little thing that sort of mocks you in some way. Hamming and exaggeration, whether it's physical or in your speech, there is again open to debate, but a reason that exaggeration might be funny is that to all of us are prone to exaggerating our own problems. To us, this guy holding on the tube rail is the most annoying thing in the world. You just say in your head without thinking, to other people, like, what are you talking about? So to see someone make capital of that in a speech, to exaggerate their own issues or shortcomings, it connects with us on that level. It's funny. So feel free at certain points to really previous speech, the guy was running up the hill in hot pursuit of this woman. The audience really liked it. They found that really funny. The hooks jumping up. And he also said, "I was ready to go and meet her. I smelled like a bath of Old Spice." Totally over-egged. Smelled like a bath of Old Spice. That is a really terrifying prospect, I think. That stuff. Puns. We were talking earlier about the difficulty of appealing to audiences from different backgrounds, but I think it's worth persevering. There are puns that are broad enough that most people will get them. And even if they don't, even if all your little things don't come off, it doesn't matter, you just move on. Move on to the next one. Maybe you try it again next time and it'll work with a different audience. Yeah, everyone knows. I used to be a banker, but I just lost interest. The biggest laugh of the night so far. A really shockingly awful joke. I think it'd be great. There's no end of examples like that. Puns abound. So you can find one that works with whatever it is you're talking about. It's a nice little way to throw it at it. Create a twist. This has been sort of I'd say a recurrent thing through several points. Is starting with something quite ordinary that most people would recognize, and then suddenly twisting it and catches people off guard. Oh, and it can generate some laughs. He said, Action did it a bit earlier with his table topic. That was a great example, and Paul pointed it out. He said, that was exactly the question I was wanting to hear. No, it wasn't. Something like that, just twisting people's expectations. And again, to go back to John Zimmer earlier on, great. There was so much he did well in that little anecdote at the beginning. First frame, second frame. My wife came in to her hands and knees. Really? How did you manage that? Get out from under the bed, you coward! A really sort of clever twist on what people were expecting, and also mocking him mercilessly. Combining all those things together. So it can also be a great little technique. So, for the last time this evening, I'd like to talk in groups again. See if you can throw some of these things in. I mean, they're not the kind of things it's easy to come off of the top of your head, but maybe you've got one stored up in reserve that might work. And once we've done this, I would like one brave soul from each group to give a little rendition of what they've been working on. So please keep that in mind when you're doing this final bit. So, to the speech you've worked on already, please, if you can, add one of these elements to it. It's in 5 minutes.